Welcome back, my lovelies. Welcome back to another great episode of Scandal Queens. It is me, EB, the D-influencer, helping you deconstruct the narcissistic cult of Hollywood. And I actually don't know if I should have said great episode. It's a deep dive. It's a doozy today. We're definitely getting back in the whale time machine yet again and getting back into the deep end because we're going to be wading back into Mafia waters today. Hollywood and the Mafia. I think we did quite a tasty little episode last week, so we're going to keep it going with getting into one of the biggest, most scandalous, and most well-known celebrity messies of all time, the final week of Marilyn Monroe's life. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably rolling your eyes and going, yep, it's only a matter of time until every celebrity pop culture podcast uses Marilyn for content. But I do want to warn you, this is not like a Marilyn episode. This is definitely not going to be your mama or your grandmama's Marilyn Monroe episode. And I highly, highly doubt it's going to be like any other Marilyn Monroe deep dive that you've ever heard before, because I've been a fan of Marilyn for a long time. I've ingested as much Marilyn stuff as I can possibly stomach until about maybe, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years ago when I got fed up with the narrative that's always been sold about her. So today we're not going to go into the same old fodder, right? I'm not going to rehash all that crap that you usually get when people talk about Marilyn Monroe's tragic last days in 1962. I'm not going to be painting her in this episode as some fragile, helpless, crazy little drug addict, because I don't think that accurately paints the correct picture of Marilyn's last days or Marilyn. In fact, I don't know that if in mainstream media we've ever been given a complete and honest representation of what Marilyn Monroe actually was probably like at the end of her life. And I definitely don't think we have ever even been shown close to the truth about what probably happened to her at the end of her life. Because it's like if you're going to go and if you're watching like Dakota Johnson and Michelle Williams slogged Marilyn tripe, then you get this just like whitewashed, watered down, weak damsel in distress picture of Marilyn, right? This story about Marilyn, especially these last days of her life. They make it seem like all of 1962 she was this absolute drug addict psycho. And they'll tell you that like, oh, we're finally gonna give Marilyn her voice, but then the voice is always like, oh, look what a broken little thing she was, right? And I don't think that is an entirely fair representation. I don't think it's an entirely fair break if you're actually someone who looks extremely closely at what was going on, what her health was like, what was happening professionally, and what was happening personally in her life at that time. And I don't know how someone paints that picture necessarily if they've like spent a lot of time digging into the men around her, right? Because it feels like a lot of these stories serve the men that were around Marilyn Monroe more than anything else. Because while Michelle Williams might want to paint Marilyn Monroe's final moments, or, you know, whoever like her, they like to paint this last stretch of her life as this weepy-eyed little thing. I think when you look at three big key elements, you see something else entirely, something quite kind of the opposite, really, honestly. If you're looking at this story, the events from eyewitnesses in an emotionally intelligent way, I think it changes everything. So we're going to take a new look at the final week of Marilyn's life today. And we're going to be looking specifically at some big key elements of her final days that no one really seems to have taken the time to explore in any kind of significance. And here in these events that you and I are going to talk about, I think was what we find the truth. These places, these people who just haven't been focused on enough. And it's not only about Marilyn herself, but I think it's about painting a real picture that makes sense about what happened in the week leading up to her death that fateful August night. So we're going to deep dive into expansive research that I've been doing, new research, because I cannot tell you how many different sources I have had to use to piece all of this together. If you're on Patreon, you can see I've got tons of deep dives and little pieces of research. I've got reading lists, all kinds of stuff. It's really, really wild. And I've never seen the whole story told in the way that all of these bits and pieces paint a very convincing picture, a very compelling picture. So we're going to go into that, Marilyn's last moments. We're going to creep into every corner that we can. And then I'm going to lay it all out for you. My theory of what happened to Marilyn Monroe, the events that brought her to the brink, and the people who helped to shape them. Put these pieces together, and I think you have every question you've ever had about Marilyn Monroe's death. And I mean every single one of them, every single mystery that you've got. I'm talking autopsies, missing body, like all kinds of stuff. I think if you put all of these pieces together that I'm about to share with you, the mystery kind of disappears, right? We kind of get our answers. And it just all comes down to following the trail. You just have to follow the trail of names and places and people. So that's what we're going to do today. Marilyn's final tragic last week. What happened? Who was there? And who was involved? Mafia. I'm going to give you all the facts and see what you think. But before we get into the really juicy stuff, let's do a quick temperature check and see what the rest of Hollywood is getting up to at the moment. Just a couple of stories for you today, because we do have quite a bit to get into. Right off the top, Nick Reiner has officially been indicted for murder. Of course, you all probably will have heard about this, but Nick Reiner, the son of slain beloved director Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle Reiner, has now been indicted for 2 counts of murder with special circumstances, which I thought was quite interesting. He appeared in court on August 12th, where he pled not guilty to the murders. Of course, we all know. According to the unsealed court documents, the special circumstances of the charges include lying in wait to attack at the most vulnerable moment, and then the use of a knife in the commission of the murders. Now, you might be thinking, oh, special circumstances, does that mean he's going to get cut a break? Absolutely not. They're basically saying that these special circumstances make the murder even more heinous. So essentially what the courts have done is they've added aggravating circumstances, which paint the crimes like even more deadly, even more insidious. And so that now means that Reiner is eligible for even more severe penalties as he faces the trials coming up next month for these murders. They can go for the death penalty, essentially, if the prosecution chooses to seek it, because they've now added this. So they're going to get him. He's going down. That's it. He'll be lucky to not get the death penalty. It's a really dark, really scary case, heartbreaking in every single aspect. Nick Reiner, of course, murdered Rob and Michelle while they slept in their home last December. And it now sounds like he planned this, waited for them to come home, get in bed, fall asleep, and then he attacked them while they were at their weakest. It was a brutal murder, and one that comes on the back of a lot of upheaval that sounds like escalating behavior from Nick, who does have a history of addiction and mental illness. So Reiner is now scheduled for his next appearance, a pre-trial hearing on September 15th of this year. His attorney, public defender Kimberly Green, declined to comment on the status of the charges or the current status of her client. However, we do know that multiple stories have come out in the months since Nick's arrest detailing his behavior in the prison, and they're saying he's completely erratic. He's hostile behavior inside the jail. He's threatened guards, he's threatened staff, and I'm sure he's threatened other inmates as well. So looking like a case of another Hollywood kid completely fried by the world that he grew up in. Just a broken person. Horrific, tragic. And what makes it worse is that there's no happy ending, right? Like, even if he gets the death penalty, even if he rots in jail for the rest of his life, which he will, there's no good outcome, right? Like, Rob and his wife are dead, and Nick he's basically dead now. To his siblings, he's dead. So it's just tragedy all around. All right, second and last story of today for the little temperature check. Perez Hilton's kids have been living in hell, it turns out. Absolute hell. More details about Perez Hilton's TikTok live meltdown are coming out by the week, and specifically about his children, and it's just getting worse. It's just worse. As we now know, Perez Hilton's 3 children were actually in the house at the time of his live stream meltdown. Yeah, yep. All 3 children were in the house, as well as his relatives, his sister and his mother, I believe. And the women removed the children from the house once it was pretty clear that they were witnessing some alarming stuff. But he didn't just start doing that. He wouldn't have just started doing that, right? We're now learning that not only have the children been subjected to this horrifying incident, it turns out that they have been witnessing years of Perez Hilton's terrifying outbursts and meltdowns. According to TMZ, who reported the story on August 13th, Perez Hilton's children were sat down and walked through their father's mental health struggles before, they didn't say how long before, shortly before his TikTok self-filleting session. Presumably, family explained to all 3 children that their father wasn't well and described to them signs and when to call for help. Fans of Perez, because apparently that scumbag still has some scumbag fans, said that the children have been seen on previous TikTok live streams walking around in the background while Perez was going in depth about his struggles and his mental health and just every disgusting thing about himself. Perez Hilton's mother has now filed for custody of the children, but she raised Perez and has co-signed all of his disgusting behavior for the last 20-something years. So, I don't really know if she's a better option for them, but there's one thing. This is all I really want to say about all of this. I know what growing up in this kind of house is like. I didn't grow up with a famous parent, and I thank God I didn't grow up with a parent who liked to cut themselves up in front of me. Thank the Lord. But I did grow up with a parent who went from 0 to "I'll kill us both" quicker than you could turn your head to the left. And it wasn't just one person like this that I grew up with in a house. I had multiple unstable adults who were basically central to my life. Adults who were more likely to explode on you than they ever were to hug you. Adults who came home every day and vomited their rage and their disappointment all over you when life wasn't going well, right? Adults who were so mentally ill that you could literally, there were some of us in the family who literally joked and said we could set a clock by their brain chemistry, because boom, Christmas time, you knew you were 3 weeks out from Christmas time when the meltdowns started, when you started getting screamed at and you started getting called names, walking on eggshells. And then you knew for the next 3 months, you were basically just going to have to make sure you were hiding, right? Meeting at work. Well, you knew you better brace yourself before these people came home, right? If they had meetings at work, you better hide. You better be out of sight as soon as you heard those keys in the door. It does not matter what kind of money you have. It doesn't matter if you always have food in your belly. It doesn't matter if you have nice clothes, if you get bought a car. It doesn't matter if you go on big fancy holidays or you have the nicest of everything, right? If you cannot be emotionally safe in your own effing home as a child. And I can tell you that from firsthand experience. Growing up, someone else's, as someone else's war zone, in someone else's war zone, it destroys you as a child. And it sets you up to think that you're living in a war zone for the rest of your life. Perez Hilton's children have never once, and I guarantee you this, they have never once known mental or emotional safety and stability with him as their father. I am willing to bet money on that. He never should have been allowed to be a father ever. He had no right to be a father ever, and he proved that every fucking year he was in front of a camera. He didn't have the personality to be a father. He doesn't have the morality to be a father. He doesn't have the empathy, the compassion, the sympathy, or the intelligence to be a father. So yeah, of Perez Hilton's children, of course they saw what he did to himself, and it won't be the first and the last time if they have to deal with him. Right? I guarantee you they have probably seen worse than what you and I saw on TikTok Live. And for all the fuck we know, he's done worse because he has said some really weird stuff, very weird stuff that would disqualify you from getting a job as a teacher. All right. Perez Hilton is evil. He is a bad person. There is nothing redeeming about him. He's not even worthy of redemption. He was not born, sadly, with a functioning human brain. He was born with the brain of a psychopath and a narcissist. And unfortunately, he used none of his money, power, or privilege to rectify that fact. And now, in my personal opinion, he's too far gone. He's too far gone. It's too much. Some people cannot be saved, and some people don't want to be saved. At some point, there's no going back. And for me, the continual abuse of children, sexual and otherwise, whether they're his or not, is a point of no return. And I wish nothing but the worst for Perez Hilton for the rest of what I hope is a very short life. Hugs and kisses, Perez. Get well never. All right, that is enough of that, don't you think? Maybe it's time to get into something and someone we actually care about, huh? Marilyn Monroe, one of the biggest personalities that has ever lit up a screen. Lover or hater, you cannot deny the sheer magnetism and power that Marilyn had, and you cannot deny her staying power either. Even now, decades after her death, the world is still slathered in her image. People pay homage and tribute to her every day. T-shirts, mugs, bags, costumes, books, movies, TV shows, podcasts, parades, pilgrimages. There is nothing in this world that hasn't been touched by the spirit of Marilyn Monroe. She's still one of the most talked about and thought about celebrities of all time, lingering on in the world of pop culture far beyond even the massive reach she had in her lifetime. Every corner of Marilyn's existence has been examined with a microscope by those desperate to wring the dollars and cents out of it. Every inch of her life has reportedly been exposed and commodified, with the brain dead like Kim Kardashian spending millions to feel as though they're spending a second inside of her skin. But even in all of that overexposure, all these decades of painting and repainting Marilyn, I don't know if we've ever been told the truth about her, especially about the last week of her life. And that sounds like big words, right? I'm just this writer and a TikTok creator. How could I possibly have found anything that would change the same flimsy story that's been flogged around for 64 years? Well, I just so happen to be someone who spent the last several months digging through some of the deepest secondary source material. And originally, all I was looking for were some Owsley Stanley dross and a couple of surprising Hollywood CIA connections. But what I've actually found is a whole new story about Marilyn Monroe, partially, of all people, unraveling itself slowly, piece by piece, as little shards of her story kept appearing and reappearing. And little by little, I came to form an entirely different view and opinion on how it all went down in August 1962. So that's what I want to look at with you. The last tragic week of Marilyn Monroe's life. There's some big pieces here that have never been examined, that have never been explained to the wider public, not by any mainstream depictions of Marilyn Monroe's life. So that's what you and I are going to do. We're going to add some context to the last week of Marilyn Monroe's life, her death, and we're going to explore not only who she was in that final week, but where she was in life and on a map. Follow these threads, and you're not looking at a damsel in distress. Not quite, not really, not in the way that we think. If you're honest about the evidence, that week of that kind of weak, watery version of Marilyn starts to kind of disappear. It doesn't look quite the same. What you see instead, I think, is, yes, an unraveling of everything you've been told about Marilyn, but mainly an unraveling about the men around her and the state that she was actually in at the very end of her life. Look at this final week, and I think you figure out the enigma. Yeah, the enigma of her death, sure, but the enigma of her life too. And more importantly, the enigma of those men that she surrounded herself with. So, ready to go deep? I've got all new context, major surprise. We're going to go there. I'm going to lay it all out. And then, like I said, at the end, I'll tell you my personal theory about what I believed happened to Marilyn Monroe. So, here we go. Buckle up. If you're going to get into the death of Marilyn Monroe, or even if you even want a chance of considering her mindset at the end of her life, you really have to zoom out and take a bigger picture at the place that she was in 1962 in general. What was Marilyn Monroe doing? What were her motivations? What direction was she heading when everything came to a head in August? I think you get a really different picture when you zoom out. At least I did. When I pulled out and started looking at the full scope of what was going on in her personal life, her professional life, what was in these declassified files, I did not feel the same. I still felt huge, overwhelming sadness and compassion, but I didn't feel this pity. Marilyn Monroe's last year, essentially, it's always been painted as this pretty tragic thing, right? It's all the media is tragedy porn. All the books, the shows, the documentaries, she's this frazzled woman. She's all over the place. She's unfocused. She's overly emotional. And she's basically just always a hair's breadth away from killing herself. She's like this butterfly about to fly out in traffic and be crushed on the wheel, right? But zooming out, I'm not convinced of that anymore. I don't think she was this fragile, broken thing until the last week of her life. I think before then, I think she was very sad, very stressed, but fighting. And I think if you really look at the facts, that's what you kind of see. Because when you look at it, Marilyn started 1962 out very, very strong, right? 1961 had been pretty bad. She had her divorce with Arthur Miller, but in 1962, she's coming in. She's a single woman. She's been divorced for a year, and she's kind of resetting herself, right? She's getting away from all of that. Yes, 1961 had been really, really bad. It saw Marilyn get divorced from Arthur Miller after she discovered he really, really had a lot of disdain for her. She ended up in a mental facility in which they horrifically abused her and put her in basically a cell, a lunatic, she was a lunatic. They were just awful to her. But 1962, it was looking like she was going to turn all of that around. She got back on the road early, working out the first version of a new deal with 20th Century Fox in January of that year. It would be for her final role in the unfinished Something's Gotta Give. And it was a big deal when the word started to spread about this. It was really, really big deal. It was oh, Marilyn Monroe's got a new chick, got a new flick. That's great. And there was a lot of excitement and murmurs in the press. In February, Marilyn achieved one of the great big milestones of her life, and her friends would later say, people who actually knew her, they said, yeah, this was her crowning achievement. She had never owned her own home, and this was her house with her name on it. She bought it with her money, which I think Joe DiMaggio helped her out, but it was hers, okay? And it was big. It was a big deal. It was a major accomplishment in a time when American women weren't even allowed to have their own bank accounts yet, right? I don't think most people realize that. And you got to think about that. Women weren't even allowed to have their own bank accounts without some kind of man organizing it or signing off on it. But Marilyn Monroe had just bought this beautiful 1929 Spanish hacienda-style home with exposed beam ceilings and terracotta floors. I mean, that's a get. I mean, we all have to admit that's a big get for a gal, right? Marilyn was proud of the accomplishment and settled into the home with a flurry of nesting. She traveled to Mexico in February to shop for colorful fabrics and furniture, and even had a custom yellow and blue set of tiles made for the kitchen. It was just like this explosion of color. It was just her home was just this explosion of color. It is a true reflection of the energy and hopefulness, I think, that Marilyn felt in that home, and the home, though, sadly would be her last. Here's what's interesting, though. When I was looking into this trip, it turns out the FBI tracked her throughout this trip, and while she was in Mexico, which she was supposed to be there shopping for things for her new home, she actually ended meeting up with and connecting with the filmmaker Jose Bolsaños. And he was this quite well-known, quite respected independent leftist filmmaker, and he canoodled with this whole group of very leftist, some of them communist Americans that had fled McCarthyism and what was going on with America in the Cold War to live in Mexico. Now, Jose and Marilyn had a passionate fling. Like she was telling people she was in love with him. She was telling him she was in love with him. And the two, while she was in Mexico, spent a lot of time together. I think she kind of extended her stay a little bit. And this is in the final weeks of February 1962. But the trip was not all sunshine and roses. As it turns out, Eunice Churchill, the decorator that Marilyn hired to go down there with her and help her source things, she was actually an FBI informant, and she was leaking everything that was happening, like every phone call Marilyn made, every party she went to, the time she was spending with Jose Bolsaños, like all of that stuff. So while Marilyn was in Mexico, this informant tells the FBI, the news has come that Arthur Miller is remarried, and Marilyn is extremely upset. So apparently Marilyn, while she's down there, she's falling for Jose, and then she finds out Arthur has remarried, and it's basically to the woman she was worried about, and she has a meltdown. She calls Joe DiMaggio. Joe DiMaggio says, I'm not coming down. I'm not doing it. She calls Frank Sinatra, and Frank Sinatra specifically also refuses to come and help her. I don't know if he seems to be in Mexico, because in the FBI file, it's a bit confusing. Frank has either sent her down there or he has summoned her down there, but then there's a bunch of other redacted information, so you can't really tell what for. You can make some pretty stable assumptions, but then when she has this breakdown and she asks Frank Sinatra to come to her because he knew her and Arthur, he refuses to do it. So very, 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 very interesting, but very chaotic trip, emotionally chaotic at the end. That whole emotional episode seems to pass pretty quickly, though, as Marilyn just basically zeroes in and focuses on Jose, who is a married man, by the way. And she's all excited. Marilyn starts getting all giddy about spending all this time with Jose, and she's talking about bringing him back to America and taking him to the Golden Globes. And Eunice reports to the FBI that both she, herself, and the doctor are very concerned about Marilyn spending all this time with this leftist who is teaching her all these leftist ideologies and telling her, like, you don't have to believe all of these things. You don't have to do all of these things, yada, 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 yada. And they tell Marilyn, you need to get away from him, which Marilyn refuses to do. So she leaves from Mexico at the beginning of March and heads back to the East Coast, to New York City. And I think she goes back and forth a couple times between New York and Los Angeles. But she essentially goes back to America. Jose is there at some point because in March, Marilyn shows up at the Golden Globes with Jose on her arm. So that emotional moment in Mexico for Arthur Miller doesn't seem to last long. She seems to throw herself into this new romance and is quite giddy about it. That March at the Golden Globes, the 19th Golden Globes, if you need to know, Marilyn was awarded the Henrietta Award for World Film Favorites. And, you know, as I said, Jose was with her. They're both glowing. If you go and look at the pictures, she's absolutely glowing with him. He seems a bit overwhelmed, but also he seems like a kid. It's a big win for Marilyn, who by and large had been snubbed by most of the Academy bodies. They would give her pop culture kind of awards, but for the most part, they kind of looked down on the bombshell sex icon shtick. Still, the award was a boost, and Marilyn was right back out on the road doing press rounds for Fox, and something's got to give. She headed back out to the West Coast, where she was brought in for a round of dress fittings at Fox Studios, and while she was there, she was invited out to Palm Springs, where she attended a party at Bing Crosby's house that was attended by JFK. Now, this party actually ends up being, I think, very important, and it does end up being a big scandal inside these like inner circles. Not so much for the rumors that it caused, because this weekend in March, where JFK was at Bing Crosby's house in 1962, this is where the rumor originated that Marilyn Monroe had an affair with Kennedy. And the most reliable sources seem to say that if any sexual contact ever happened between JFK, John F. Kennedy, and Marilyn Monroe, it was a one night stand, like, we're both too drunk at this event. That's, if they ever hooked up, this was it. I don't think that there is ever any other time that they had any kind of sexual contact. I don't really think they had sexual contact here. But that concept, that idea that JFK and Marilyn Monroe got together, it came from this March party 1962 at Bing Crosby's ranch. But that's not the drama. I think this ends up being a very important moment in Marilyn Monroe's life and her very soon to happen death, because it creates a huge and chaotic drama and rift with the very violent Frank Sinatra. The long and short of it is that in March 1962, President Kennedy had agreed to visit Frank Sinatra for the weekend in Sinatra's new Palm Springs compound, okay? Sinatra went all out. He spent a ton of money, like, preparing for the visit. He built a new presidential suite onto the house, and he had, like, real gold-plated name tags put on the doors, and he had, like, an entire helipad poured, and fucking helipad poured, so that the president could come quickly in and out via helicopter, because that's what these perverts do. At the last minute, Kennedy changed his mind, though, about visiting Sinatra. He was like, nope, sorry, buddy, can't do it. We're not going to come stay there and bring all the positive press with us. And it turns out that was because J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI at the time, cornered Kennedy and his brother Bobby just before this Palm Springs visit. And he basically said, yeah, listen, I have recordings of you guys having sex with various celebrities, and your voices are identifiable. And we might have some video and some photos too, because guess what? Jimmy Hoffa has recorded all of you, and he's given all of the recordings to me. Here they are. Now, why does that sound so bad? Do you think he just wanted to be embarrassed? Oh, no. It was because the Mafia had made these recordings. Yep, via their buddy Frank Sinatra, who was also in these recordings having group sex with identifiable voices. And J. Edgar Hoover said, thanks, now because you have a relationship with Frank Sinatra, the Mafia's got blackmail of all your sex parties. So you have to cut ties with Frank Sinatra and all of his Mafia buddies immediately, or you're going to lose your presidency. And Bobby, you're going to lose Attorney General. Well, the Kennedys do not care who put them in power. They very, very much want to hold on to that power. So JFK and RFK were like, whoa, you're right. We cannot be seen with Frank Sinatra and all his Mafia buddies that have been photographed staying at that house. So we're going to have to cut ties with him. So that means no Palm Springs visit. The Kennedys decide to cancel the visit to Frank Sinatra's home, but neither Kennedy wants to tell Frank Sinatra, because Frank Sinatra, throughout JFK's political career, has leveraged his Mafia connections to get money to help the JFK campaign along, right? So the Kennedys go, we cannot tell him. Frank Sinatra's crazy and we kind of owe him and he's going to call us out on stuff. So who do they choose to tell Frank Sinatra that the Kennedys are no longer coming to the party and they're going to go to Bing Crosby's instead? They chose Peter Lawford. Now, Peter Lawford was JFK's brother-in-law and the husband of Pat Kennedy. So he's Bobby and Jack's brother-in-law. He's married to their sister, Pat. And he got chosen to deliver the news to Sinatra for a couple of reasons. Number one, he was related to them. Number two, he was their kind of West Coast man. He mostly stayed at this mansion in Santa Monica that used to belong to Louis B. Mayer. And thirdly, he was in the Rat Pack with Frank Sinatra. So the Kennedys decide, Bobby calls up Peter Lawford and says, okay, I know we're supposed to be in Palm Springs in a couple days. Can't do it. You go tell Frank that we're not coming and that we're going to Bing Crosby's house instead. Now, Peter would later say that he was terrified. He was absolutely terrified to deliver Frank Sinatra the news. Okay. And that kind of makes sense. He does it. He drives over there, does what he's told, lies to Sinatra. He has to make up a story because he's like, I'm not telling him that you're not coming because of the Mafia. So what he tells Sinatra instead is says, oh, the Secret Service, there's a security risk and the president can't come anymore because there's a security risk and they just can't really address it. So he's going to go to Bing's because it's easier for them to protect that. Now, again, later, Peter Lawford would say that he had been terrified to deliver that news, even though it was a lie. And it's not hard to see why, because according to literally every fucking source that you find about this thing, Sinatra, when he got the news that JFK wasn't coming to visit him, he went ballistic. He stomped through the house. He went and kicked in the door to the presidential suite, kicked it in, and then just starts destroying the room. He absolutely destroys everything in the room. And then he goes out and he rips the gold nameplate off the door and he's screaming and cursing JFK's name. And then he goes outside and takes a sledgehammer to the helipad that just got finished. He's nuts. Sinatra is nuts. If you just go and Google Sinatra's violent temper, Sinatra's violent rage, and you will get multiple articles from mainstream fucking sources that talk about this. It's crazy. And Sinatra's rage didn't change what happened, okay? But it did change his feelings towards Lawford, the Kennedys, and then Marilyn Monroe. That was the month that it all shifted, because Marilyn had also been scheduled to come to Palm Springs. And when everyone moved to Bing Crosby's, Marilyn went to Bing Crosby's with everyone else. Now, sources close to Sinatra claimed that he felt betrayed by JFK by this, because he and the Mafia essentially saw themselves as central to Kennedy winning the presidency. The Mafia was the big money behind Kennedy. Sinatra was their go-boy. He was the link between these political playboys and the Mafia. So they all thought they had this big fucking swanky club. And then Sinatra found out real fast, along with the Mafia guys, that they're not in the club. They're fucking servants to the aristocrats, which is what the Kennedys are. And then as soon as they don't serve their purpose, they're going to get discarded. Like the Kennedys discard everyone who's no longer of purpose to them. Sinatra and the other working class boys had been discarded, and they knew it, right? They knew it. And it kicked off a vendetta. It really did. Now, Sinatra couldn't do anything to the Kennedys, but he targeted everything on Peter Lawford. He blamed, you can go, this is all Googleable, right? Like Google Frank Sinatra hates Peter Lawford and see what you fucking find, because I found people talking about it in their obituaries. There was people, and this feud is mentioned in their obituaries, right? Like Sinatra just decided all this was Peter Lawford's fault. He decided Peter Lawford had told them like they couldn't come there because Mafia. I don't know. It makes no sense. But Sinatra goes nuts. He kicks Lawford out of the Rat Pack, and then they're also working on this movie, Robin and the Seven Hoods, and Sinatra kicks him out of that as well. And then Sinatra ends up changing to the Republican Party. He went nuts about this party. He was pissed. For Marilyn, though, life went on, whether or not Frank was mad at her and the three people that she was closest to in the world. By April, principal photography had started for Something's Gotta Give on the Fox lot, and Marilyn threw herself into the work. All that jet setting and socializing had taken its toll, however, and Marilyn came down with what they said was a severe sinus infection and bronchitis. She was forced out of work, but the studio didn't want to hear it. They basically were like, no, get your ass to work. And when she started missing days, tensions started to show. By the time April, like the end of April came around, Marilyn was missing basically all the time, right? Now, at this point in her life, it's always kind of portrayed the same. She's hooked on pills. She's drinking all the time. She can't walk. She's strung out. She's boozed. She's just this miserable junkie who's fallen into a pattern of addiction instead of falling into her work. But I don't think that that's true. And I don't think that that's ever been accurate or honest, okay? And here's why. While it is entirely true that Marilyn became unreliable at this time and was often missing work, relying on heavy pills and alcohol to balance her moods, her sleeping, her work, like all of it, I think there's a pretty fucking simple underlying explanation that no one has made time for on a major platform ever before, and that is the fact that we now know Marilyn Monroe had endometriosis. She had severe endometriosis. She had to have multiple surgeries for. And we've seen that. That is fact. You can also go and Google this. It has now been revealed in recent medical records that Marilyn Monroe was suffering with severe and debilitating endometriosis at this stage in her life. Now, I don't know how many of you know much about endometriosis, but let me, as a woman with endometriosis, tell you a little bit about how it is. Okay, let's just come in close, hold my hand. Let's have a little chat. Endometriosis is a life-destroying disease that on average, takes a normal woman with medical access 10 years to get a diagnosis. Okay, 10 years of suffering to get a diagnosis. It's now being labeled as a form of cancer in some countries, okay? And women with this disease can see the entire quality of their lives destroyed from the inside out. If you just Google it, it'll tell you endometriosis. It's when uterine tissue grows outside of the uterus. But it's so much worse than that. It's a disease process that essentially fills your guts with adhesions and open lesions, right? The endometrial tissue that they talk about, they're like, oh, just like here's some tissue just kind of floating around in there. It attaches all over the inside of your abdomen, to your fucking organs, to the wall. And then as it heals, it creates these big, nasty adhesions, and it makes your organs stick to the walls of in the inside of your gut, right? Imagine your kidneys being strangled by weeping, bleeding tissue. Imagine having huge portions of your bowel being fused to the inside of your stomach cavity, right? It's constant pain. It's not just a bad period. It can be constant pain. If you have severe endometriosis, it's constant. It's pain every day, every second of every day. Okay. And then there's the hormonal elements to deal with, right? Night sweats, nausea, vomiting from pain, sheer exhaustion. You just wake up exhausted sometimes. Your body is literally fighting itself every single day. And when you're not fighting the pain, the nausea, the exhaustion, you're usually fighting 1,000 other comorbidities that come along with endometriosis, right? Like IBS, Crohn's disease. We could go on, right? There's so many. Just this year in 2026, it was finally revealed that that's exactly the debilitating condition that Marilyn Monroe had been struggling with for the whole of her life. It wasn't just heavy periods. She was in constant, severe pelvic pain, fertility issues, and all the other stuff. All that stuff I just described, she would have been dealing with all of that, probably 10 times worse. So I want you to imagine Marilyn Monroe jet-setting around the world, hopping at the barking demands of studios who are constantly judging her, constantly trying to make sure she's pumping in as much money as she can because she's drowning from debts, because she's got her mother in a mental health facility to try to care for her mother that abandoned her. And now I want you to imagine that she's doing all of that while she's constantly waging a war of constant pain inside of her own body every single second of every day, right? And just look, let these, if you're still not convinced, let these stats do a little bit of work for us. According to a study of 17,000 women published in the Journal of Endometriosis and Uterine Disorders, more than 2/3 of women with endometriosis have reported missing school or work due to their condition. And those same 2/3 of women surveyed reported severe productivity drops due to chronic pelvic pain. That translates to calling out of work all the time because you just cannot fucking do it. Right? So like knowing that and all of that context, does Marilyn's use of pills and alcohol suddenly seem a little different to you? Does it suddenly seem a little bit more different than just sad addict got addicted to drugs? Does her extended absences from work suddenly make sense to you? Because I know it makes sense to me. And I was never shown a Marilyn Monroe who was struggling with chronic illness. I was always just shown this broken person, right? Things are looking different. They're looking a little bit different. But whatever compassion you and I might have, Fox 20th Century Studios did not. They did not have that same compassion for Marilyn. George Zucker, who was doing Something's Gotta Give, he was just enraged. He was, how dare she miss work? Unacceptable, inexcusable. And so he just starts talking shit about her every which way to Sunday, spreads word to the press that Marilyn's impossible to work with, yada, yada, yada. Kicks off this whole huge press war, but Marilyn seems determined to do what she could to win. On May 19th, despite the drama with Fox going on behind the scenes, Marilyn got up on stage and gave her infamous happy birthday rendition to President JFK. It went down like a bombshell. It was not good. And afterward, Jack Kennedy got up on the stage and took a swipe at Marilyn by joking how lucky he was to be sung to by such a, and I quote, sweet and wholesome young woman as Marilyn Monroe. It was on purpose. He got a chuckle. Everybody chuckled. It was a not so subtle humiliation. But afterward, Marilyn still passed a specially engraved Rolex watch to one of his Secret Servicemen and asked them to pass it on to Kennedy. On the back, it read, Jack, with love, as always, Marilyn. But as the story goes, because this watch got sold at auction with a note of provenance, but upon seeing the watch, Kennedy allegedly told a man named O'Donnell, get rid of it. With the stir officially kicked up on the East Coast, Marilyn headed back west in late May of 1962. It was full steam ahead with Something's Gotta Give, and Marilyn carried on giving press and interviews as though there was nothing amiss at all. By June 7th, though, it all seemed to be taking a turn. Despite a huge press launch for Something's Gotta Give, faced specifically by Marilyn and Dean Martin, who was starring in the movie with her, the studio announced on June 7th that they were firing Marilyn from the film. It was scandalous news, and the studio execs, infuriated by her absences, and that the absences it basically threw them over budget. They had spent a bunch of days waiting around for her to show up, and she didn't show up, so they were over budget. And it made Marilyn look as awful as they could. Like they went out. They were like, this stupid bitch. Like, they didn't say anything about her being sick. It was just like, this lazy, horrible woman won't show up and just do what we tell her to do when we tell her to do it. What a slag. They replaced Marilyn Monroe with Lee Remick, then hit her with a $7 million lawsuit and an injunction. They wanted to bury Marilyn, and they were certain that they were going to do it. But Marilyn fought back. She continued doing press for Something's Gotta Give as though nothing had changed for her. And that same month is when she did the now globally famous George Barris photo shoot, in which she appears stripped down on the beach in a much more calm, subdued, and more natural Marilyn than we have perhaps ever gotten before. Scars, if you go and look at those, you can see the scars from her endometriosis surgeries on her stomach and on her hips. The photos accompanied an interview in Life magazine, a publication owned, you might find this interesting. It was owned at this time by a close personal friend of Alan Dulles, Henry Luce, and who was absolutely in Alan Dulles' pocket, and they were openly, wantonly publishing pro-CIA stuff. Like, that you cannot trust Time Life during this time. In the interview, Marilyn doesn't seem this grieving, broken, fragile thing. I don't think so. And she seems like to me, she seems like a woman, I think, who's like coming to terms with the reality that she's in. I think she's now, at this point, she's been exposed to these leftists down in Mexico who are telling her things like, you don't have to live life this way. It does not have to be this way. You don't have to live in thrall to these people. You don't have to like chase these people. You can have something else. And I think you can kind of see her kind of having this stoic shift. Like, she has been searching. She wants to be intelligent. She wants to be respected. And she had been searching to build those qualities in herself. And I think you see it starting to click for her, and she's starting to see what life actually is. It was during this interview that Marilyn famously asks the writer, "Please don't make a joke out of me." And that's not really like a surprising statement, I don't think, considering that just a month earlier, Kennedy took a swipe at her in front of the fucking world by basically joking that she was a whore. And here's where you're probably thinking, oh, well, then this must be it, right? This is where she gave up. She got fired. She got humiliated by Kennedy, and she killed herself, right? But no, it's not that straightforward because, and I also didn't know this, it turns out in July, the month before she died, Marilyn and her attorneys launched a counteroffensive against Fox. She just wasn't going to be, she was like, you can't just fire me. I've been sick. I've had surgeries. Like, you can't do this to me. So they weren't going to take it lying down. Marilyn wanted her job back on Something's Gotta Give, and she wanted more than that. She wanted a contract on her terms. So she and her lawyers started fighting with 20th Century Fox. And it turns out just before she died, this was not made hugely public information. I read this when I was reading through it was one of the writers that had interviewed a bunch of people that knew her, and they interviewed one of the people who had been one of her lawyers or her attorneys, I believe. It was someone close to her and that knew her business stuff that was tied to her estate. And they said in July, right? So the month before she died, they got it back. Fox had agreed, right, you know what? It'll be cheaper for everybody if we just take you back on. And they were haggling over a new contract when she died. She'd essentially got what she wanted. Like, she had been hired back, and they were doing secret negotiations to see what exactly the terms were going to be. But yeah, she had like won. And to me, like, does that sound like the actions of a despondent woman, a woman on death's doorstep who's like totally weak and ready to throw herself over the thing? Like, I don't know. To me, a woman in 1962 fighting a major motion picture company and winning a victory in a world in which women weren't allowed to do that. I don't know. That's just not like suicidal behavior to me. If she had been so broken that she was going to die at any minute, which is what they kind of tell you, it just seems strange that she was doing these big fights to keep her career, as in she was planning on filming. And of course, within all of this happening in July, it all culminates in what we now know is Marilyn's endometriosis surgery at Cedars-Sinai. At the end of July was like July 21st, July 20th. The doctors essentially, you have to go in, you have to have surgery. And they thought they were going to have to give her a radical hysterectomy. They thought they were going to have to basically take out everything. And Marilyn, when she went in, had taped a note to her stomach, we now know, that said, please keep it. Please keep everything that you can, because she wanted to try to have children. It was very important to her to have a child. So that happens July 20th, and Marilyn comes out of surgery successfully and is back on the road doing press and social visits within a week of the surgery. Now, all of that gives you the context of what was going on in Marilyn's life by the time we get to the end of July 1962. It's big, yes. It's messy and stressful and chaotic, also, yes. But again, it's not necessarily what I would paint as the dying gasps of a woman who was supposedly the whole of this year catatonic with misery and hopelessness. Still, I think it points to some things we haven't really been made aware of in the general mythology of Marilyn. Marilyn seemed like she had a lot to fight for. She seemed like she wanted to put up that fight. She was actively traveling, socializing, and even finding new love interests outside of the Kennedy-Sinatra Mafia circle. Her getting her job back at Fox, again, major, major victory. The weekend in question, however, was about to change everything. Marilyn was fighting back and she was carrying herself with dignity, but she had more or less stayed out of the press after the scandalous JFK birthday song, right? She wasn't doing a lot. She did the little Life interview. She did the photographs for that, but she was not just making constant appearances like she had in the past. She was pretty quiet in the weeks before her death. And then we get to the weekend of July 28th and 29th, 1962, when Marilyn made the all too familiar trek up to the Cal Neva Lodge in Lake Tahoe, where she spent her last weekend away. Now, this part of Marilyn's story has just never been examined too closely. It's never been examined too deeply, and I'm not really sure why, because this is it, you guys. This changes everything. It raises so many serious questions. Fans of Marilyn, I've been talking about this on TikTok and Instagram. If you follow me there, you've seen me talking about some things that I've found, and the fans have been coming at me. Marilyn fans have been coming at me because they love to paint this last weekend at the Cal Neva Lodge as Marilyn's last moment of happiness. It's the only place she was ever happy. That's the kind of thing they like to say. If you Google her last weekend there, the first thing that usually comes up is Marilyn gets to retreat to the Cal Neva Lodge to escape the public eye. Blah, 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 like all of these kind of claims. It's absolute fucking bullshit. And it's the same thing on the other side of the spectrum. There's other people that claim that this is where Marilyn went when she wanted to have drug-fueled sex orgies with powerful men, and she was having sex with JFK in the tunnels, and it's like all of this kind of just as ridiculously over-the-top stuff. And the same rumors have existed forever, right? Actually, what's interesting is when you look into this, the same rumors exist about Joe Kennedy, right? It says that he used to go to this lodge, the Cal Neva Lodge in Lake Tahoe, to canoodle with his secretary. But I think the truth about Marilyn's time here, the importance of Cal Neva Lodge, is probably somewhere in the middle a little bit, mixed in between half a dozen stories, half a dozen half-truths, and some straight-up outright lies and fantasies, which have been designed to shield powerful men from the spotlight of accountability. Now, whatever you believe, it's undeniable that Marilyn Monroe's last fateful visit to the Cal Neva Lodge, just a week before her death, is an important chapter in her story. Okay, it's an important chapter. But like, what happened? Well, I didn't even know about this, right? Like, I've watched so much stuff about her. This lodge, the name of it, for some reason, never stuck in my consciousness in her story. No one's ever been like, wow, what the fuck happened at this place? There's suddenly a very dramatic shift at this place. And I'm going to paint the picture for you. We're going to look it up. By the time Marilyn and the rest of the Rat Pack crews started hanging around the Cal Neva Lodge in 1960, it was owned by none other than their self-appointed leader, the ever dodgy Frank Sinatra. When he took over the resort in the 60s, he immediately splashed out walls of cash renovating this place, right? He put more than $7 million in 1960 money into the place right from the start. It was tacky. It was flashy explosion of like old school, like old, don't get insulted by this. My lovies from New Jersey. I love you. I want you on my side if I'm ever in a street fight. But it was like old school, old world New Jersey glamour, right? And celebrities and high rollers flocked there to hear nightly shows from the likes of Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and Lena Horne. While under his ownership, though, the Cal Neva Lodge would quickly become synonymous with this like 10-capped Hollywood glamour. And I'm not going to say chrome cap because this shit was rotten. And it also kind of this whole image that Sinatra and the Rat Pack cultivated at the Cal Neva Lodge, it also helped the place become synonymous with the biggest names in organized crime. In 1963, state gaming officials in Nevada would reveal that Sinatra was running his famous Cal Neva Lodge with the notorious head of the Chicago syndicate, Sam Giancana, of all fucking people. The revelation was a bombshell that would result in Sinatra losing his gaming license and ultimately the Cal Neva Lodge. But those weren't the first criminal associations that were tied to the Cal Neva Lodge. This is so weird, you guys. This place is fucking weird. Like, we all need to be researching this place. It's weird. Dig into the history of the Cal Neva Lodge and you find some really troubling patterns. I'm talking decades-long patterns that I think paint not only Sinatra's time at the lodge in a different light, but why Marilyn was associated with the lodge in the first place. The Cal Neva Lodge was built in 1926 by Robert P. Sherman, a wealthy businessman from San Francisco that wanted a remote place to entertain his wealthy friends. He wanted a place that was half in California where they all lived and half in Nevada where they could get away with prostitution and gambling and drinking in ways that they could not in California. Sherman's wealthy bosom buddies flocked to Cal Neva, and before long, they started using it as a shortcut for divorce proceedings because it also turned out while the drinking and the gambling and the prostitution laws were different, the divorce laws were also different. Yeah, so it turned into a divorce palace. I kid you not. It was a rich person's divorce palace because it turns out in Nevada, you can file for a divorce after 6 weeks of residency. No questions asked. So Sherman's wealthy and well-known friends realized that Cal Neva Lodge was the perfect place to stay and take in the air for 6 weeks if you wanted to get a divorce. So that's it. It became known as the Divorcee Palace. You can go and look that up. They refer to it as a palace of divorcees in the local papers. There were some other interesting laws, however, that made Cal Neva a titillating place for the wealthy and well-known of American society. Because the lodge was partially in California and partially in Nevada, it had the ability to offer its wealthy patrons a much more diverse array of extracurriculars than those that were just in California. Namely, on the Nevada side of the lodge, guests could gamble and drink, depending on what year it was, because it flip-flopped during Prohibition and these different morality laws. You could basically, it was this whole gimmick of you could order a cocktail in California and have it delivered to you in Nevada, all while you hung out at a roulette table that wasn't strictly legal, right? Because wealthy people love their loopholes, right? So the papers hinted that there was other extracurricular guests, like extracurriculars for guests that could be enjoyed during their stay at the Cal Neva Lodge, especially if they were staying on the Nevada side of the compound, which is where the luxury cabins were. Namely, they hinted that essentially if you go and stay at this lodge, this is all in old papers, you can look this up, that if you go and stay there, you can find company. You can always find company at the Cal Neva Lodge. Sally Rand, of all people, was a leader of such company in the 1930s. Sally Rand was the infamous burlesque dancer, of course, who was known for her nude fan routine and a nude Lady Godiva act. And she did this scandalous nude parade at the Lincoln Tavern that we talked about in the last episode. I think she did get arrested there. She almost got arrested there for leading a bunch of young girls out naked into the streets in Morton Grove, Illinois. She's basically a big name for being this like sexually provocative woman. And that's why she made such a splash in Lake Tahoe when she arrived at the end of the 30s with a troop of girls that the Cal Neva Lodge dubbed its beauties or its glamour girls. Now, these Cal Neva glamour girls it was a troop of very tall, very thin, very beautiful women that wore skimpy costumes while performing. Questionable routines. There's one where they talk about, we're doing a routine from Mozambique tonight, and the women basically talks about, it's very racist, I'll say that, but it talks about them dancing almost nude and animalistically late into the night. It was essentially a strip show with girls who were offered as companions afterward to wealthy patrons. And Sally has to appear in the local papers at the time. It's around 1938. And she's defending her girls. She's like, they are not just their looks. We pick them for intelligence and we pick them for talent. But the connotation's very clear. You can tell she's like trying to scramble to defend what is going on at the Cal Neva Lodge. And before you think I'm seeing patterns that aren't there, here's a little fun fact. After Sherman's Cal Neva Lodge exploded in popularity with the rich and famous who wanted divorces, it caught the eye of the most unsavory people in the whole of the country. Literally the whole of the country. Organized crime moved in on the Cal Neva Lodge in 1929 with G.O.B. Goldie and would own it, as far as I know, in various shapes and forms until the late 1960s or 1970s, which is where I've just stopped on my research. It could be owned by criminals after then, kind of is, because Larry Ellison owned it for a little bit, but like literal mobsters, okay? I'm talking mobster gangsters from 1929. That was when George B. Goldie, a well-known, well-established gambling and pimp lord, took the place over. And you can go and Google him. He was arrested so many times. He's in the papers for beating the hell out of his wife, for doing divorce fraud, like all kinds of stuff. He's a bad, bad man.
And from that moment on, the advertising for the place distinctly changes. There's suddenly always like pretty dancing girls on there. There's like always women on the flyers, where before it had been like kayaks and trees and fishing and things, and now it's like girls, dancing couples, girls, drinks. Like you can tell right away it was a mess. By 1930, the Cal Neva Lodge was gripped in a big scandal, after the massively famous Clara Bow canceled 13 grand in checks. She got scammed into going there by the cowboy Will Rogers, who it ended up worked for the Cal Neva Lodge gamblers, and he would bring women in to go and spend all their money. Just like really crazy stuff. You can go watch my TikTok about it, but it's like it's always been this way. This Cal Neva Lodge, it's always been criminals taking advantage of women. After it left George B. Goldie, it went to Jim McKay and Bill Graham, who were known pimps and really high up in the Reno organized crime, like gambling crime. It's awful. And if you go and look this place up again, it's just years. Like you see stories about dancers being beat up, women being burned with cigarettes and beat by people who work there. Like it's obviously a fucking brothel, right? Where women are getting trafficked. This Cal Neva Lodge is dark. It is dark. I'm gonna have to do a whole nother episode on that, because like we're running out of time and this is a bad weekend for Maryland. But you see what I'm talking about now. There's just some weird stuff. There's weird stuff. I'll do another episode. I'll bring Connie in. We'll do like a Cal Neva Lodge episode, but it's just weird stuff. And the drama around women specifically only gets weirder at Cal Neva the closer you get to the 60s. Marilyn's last fateful stay there aside, multiple other women with ties to the lodge would be implicated in organized crime in the 1960s. The biggest would be Phyllis McGuire and Judith Exner, both women who were romantically involved with mobster Sam Giancana and who both had close personal friendships with Frank Sinatra. Judith Exner, it would later be revealed one of Giancana's girls, was introduced to President John F. Kennedy via Frank Sinatra, who seemed to do this kind of thing a lot. And Phyllis McGuire, who had performed at the lodge with her sisters for many years, would be sucked into her own scandal when it was revealed that she and Giancana were sharing a cabin on the Cal Neva property with Frank Sinatra's knowledge and blessing. So it seems that at least by 1960s, it's a pretty open secret that there's some kind of trafficking thing going on with women. I did find in 1940, I found an article in a local newspaper in which 3 very well-known actresses refused to perform at the Cal Neva Lodge, even though they were offered thousands of dollars. The whole thing, it was Helen Morgan, Winnie Shaw, and Fifi Dorsey. They all refused to appear at the Cal Neva Lodge, and the newspaper writer specifically says, despite the money offered, they will not go there. And what's really interesting is that if you were to look into Winnie Shaw and Fifi Dorsey specifically, you would find out that these 2 women walked out on Hollywood contracts. One just left it all behind completely. The other one went and did stage instead. And I think that paints a fucking picture. It really paints a picture. And all of this does matter, because what I'm about to tell you, you need all of this context to understand why I very much believe the story we're about to get into. Because this is the place that Marilyn Monroe went in 1962, where actresses refused to go, where girls have been burnt with cigarettes and beat by male members of staff, or people have disappeared, all kinds of stuff, right? This is where she went to spend the last weekend of her life in 1962, a joint that is owned by criminals, has been since 1929. Okay, you got that? We're good on that, because we're about to tread into some really gray territory here, and we're going to get into the meat of it now. It's all bad. It's all bad from here. So when I say gray territory now, everything from here on out is either FBI declassified files, or it is firsthand accounts from people who spoke to authors, who spoke to interviewers over the years. These are people who knew Marilyn, who worked with Marilyn, or who knew the people around her and worked with the people involved in these stories. Everything I'm laying out here is what I believe to be the most reliable, probable, and believable claims about Marilyn's final weekend at Cal Neva and the final week of her life. And we're just going to follow this through an emotionally intelligent, trauma-informed lens. Remember everything we just talked about this shady place and all these shady people, okay? Because here it is. We're going to put all the pieces together of Marilyn's last weekend. So July of 1962, Marilyn's got a lot going on. She's a few months earlier, she does the JFK birthday bombshell, and she gets caught in a battle with Fox, right? We got all that. We get it. She's had surgery. We got it. It's no wonder then, right? She had a lot going on. Why she wanted to take a break at the end of July. Of course, getting out of Los Angeles probably felt like a godsend. It was smoggy, it was smoky, it was dirty. There was press everywhere trying to take pictures of her doing anything. Like, of course she wants to go on a holiday. But here's the thing that most people don't know, right? It's that Marilyn was broke. She was broke. She was super broke. She was like millions of dollars in debt. People think Marilyn died rich, but she did not. She did not. She had gotten her own home by being able to borrow against, what she was worth and probably from DiMaggio, but she was in substantial debt. And it took the people who ran her estate years to get the estate out of debt. Getting out of town, especially in style, was something that Marilyn could really only do through the resources of her much wealthier friends or boyfriends. Friends like Peter Lawford, who was married into the endless tap that was the Kennedy family. Marilyn was spending a lot of time in Santa Monica in those days at the home of Pat Kennedy and Peter Lawford, who she was very, very, very close friends with. She and Peter were super close, like super, super, super close. I don't think there was anything going on with them, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was. And Marilyn also seemed to have this really close bond with the Kennedy family in general. There was a lot of, if you see my Patreon, I've shared this letter from Jean Kennedy, one of the younger sisters, who used to write Marilyn a lot of letters. So that's probably why Marilyn ended up at Frank Sinatra's, like on his private plane that July weekend in 1962 with Peter Lawford and Pat Kennedy. She was at Peter Lawford and Pat Kennedy's house. The invitation came through and she went, yeah, why not? I can't afford to get on a private jet on my own and jet set off away from this smoggy city. I'll take someone else. So the three of them, even though they know Frank Sinatra hates their fucking guts at this point, they all go, yeah, that'll be great. Let's get on this super luxurious private jet. We'll go up to Lake Tahoe. But it's a weird invitation, isn't it? Isn't it weird? The Kennedys were on a split with Sinatra. In March, the whole family, especially Jack and Bobby, had been told to stay away. And Pat had absolutely been told to stay away from anything Mafia, to stay away from Frank Sinatra. But, they did it. They went anyway. And here's where the story gets really, really weird. Okay. And this is all now coming from, again, FBI files and firsthand accounts. As the story goes, Marilyn, Peter, and Patricia, Pat, headed up to Lake Tahoe together Saturday, July 27th. Now, they might have accepted because Pat might still have been having an affair with Sinatra, because she did at one point have a sexual affair with Sinatra, but we don't know. I think they probably were hopeful that Peter was going to be able to make peace with Frank again. I would hope that they had hoped they were going to make peace. But whatever happened, they arrived on Saturday, July 27th, a night when Dean Martin was headlining, and the group was greeted by Frank Sinatra himself. So at this point, I found an interesting tidbit. On an old Hollywood blog, which had an interview with Peter Lawford and some quotes from later FBI transcripts, they claimed that Pat, Marilyn, and Peter met Sinatra in the lobby at the Cal Neva Lodge, and there they saw that he was with Sam Giancana, the mobster. Now, this blog claimed that when Pat Kennedy saw him, she stated loudly enough for Giancana to hear, and for everyone in the lobby to hear, Pat Kennedy says, "We can't stay here. We have to go." Like, we have to go. And that makes sense because the Kennedy family have been told to stay the fuck away from people like that, okay? Pat would have been told that 100%, 100%. Now, at this point in the story, that's where Pat disappears. The last time we see Pat is her saying, "We cannot stay here." So I don't know. I think it's very likely that she returned to Santa Monica. I think she probably either went somewhere else locally and stayed somewhere else, or she left because she disappears from the story at this point. She doesn't even reappear on the plane home. It makes sense. The witnesses claim that from this point on, no matter how many years later these claims are made, it's all essentially the same. They all essentially describe the same Marilyn from this point. Lawford and everyone else claim that basically the whole of the weekend, she was just this emotional mess. There are some people that say she goes into the celebrity ballroom and she has some kind of big outburst, and Sinatra and a bunch of other guys like rush her out. They're like, get her out of here. Other people say that she didn't even come out of her room, that they said she was in her room for the whole of the weekend. No one saw her. She was depressed. She was passed out. She was making a bunch of phone calls. She was highly, highly, highly drunk or on the influence of pills. The most reliable sources of like the one that we're like very, 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 very certain this happened because the most people report this story, they basically report Marilyn floating around at various times, not being around a lot, but being seen here and there throughout the weekend, and her being described as being out of it. She was barefoot. Everyone that saw her at the weekend described her as being barefoot the whole time and out of it, which was very, very out of character for her. Several guests that weekend would claim they saw her by the swimming pool when everyone else was dancing inside. They were dancing the night away. And Marilyn was seen barefoot, again, out of sorts, staring up the hill while she was standing beside the swimming pool. And some people said they saw Joe DiMaggio up the hill, which is very interesting because it was claimed that Joe DiMaggio had been banned by Sinatra from being there that night specifically. His brother was there. Joe DiMaggio's brother was there, but he was not there. But witnesses said they saw Marilyn while she was very out of sorts looking up the hill, With the exception of one outburst in the celebrity showroom that's alleged, Marilyn seems not to have taken part in public celebrations that packed the house that night at the Cal Neva Lodge. Friends of Sinatra who were there that night, one of them his photographer, who we will talk about in just a minute, put out the story that Marilyn was depressed, that she had stayed in her cabin all night, and she was just making emotional phone calls. One witness claimed that an extremely emotional Marilyn had called Joe DiMaggio, and that's why he showed up the hill, even though he had been banned from being there, that he was still trying to watch over her, and she had been really emotionally upset when she called him. Every single person who gave a story about Marilyn that weekend, though, essentially tells the same story. She wasn't around much, and when she was around much, she seemed emotionally like she was in a really, really bad place. Rumors began swirling that she overdosed at the resort on a combination of sleeping pills and alcohol, that she had died and she had to be brought back by Sinatra and Giancana. But here, and this is where it gets really rough, right? You're going to need to brace yourselves, and you're going to trigger warning. If you are a victim of sexual abuse, make sure you're in the right headspace to listen to what's going to come next, okay? Because it's bad. So this emotional Marilyn on her last weekend at Cal Neva got me digging around. People aren't emotional for no reason. I don't care what mental health problems they have or don't have. Emotions happen as a response to things. And if Marilyn was emotional, I wanted to know why. So I started looking into more stories that others had conveniently left out over the years. I think it's really fucking convenient in the age of Me Too and Believe All Women that these stories conveniently have been left out of every retelling of Marilyn's story. But essentially, it goes like this, right? At some point late on Saturday night or early on Sunday morning, things went wrong. We know they went wrong because Frank Sinatra's people put out a story that went wrong. People that were there said she left early. Peter Lawford said she ended up leaving early than expected. Something went wrong. At the time, guests whispered that Marilyn had died in her cabin. They thought that she was dead. Others claimed that she had overdosed, and then the phone had been discovered lying beside her. Very similar to the scene that was found a week later. Just lots of stuff. Sinatra's team, when questioned, would subtly leak the not-so-subtle story that he and Sam Giancana had rushed to Marilyn's cabin after becoming worried about her. And there, Sinatra's people who whisper, they found an overdosed Marilyn, who they revived, and they sent her to the hospital, saving her life just in time. That story, of course, was complete nonsense. Marilyn Monroe was never sent to the hospital on the weekend of July 28th to 29th in Lake Tahoe, and she certainly wasn't sent to one by Frank fucking Sinatra. Former employees of Sinatra would claim that the truth was a much more brutal one. Marilyn had almost died on the property, that was true, and Frank in a rage had demanded that she get off the property before she spoiled the Cal Neva's reputation, whatever that fucking was. I believe the truth is more accurately told in the story of Bill Woodfield, Frank Sinatra and Marilyn Monroe's longtime photographer, who laid it all bare for an author's book on Monroe decades later. According to Bill Woodfield, he had been approached at the end of the weekend by Frank Sinatra himself. Sinatra, he claimed, handed him a roll of film and told him to deliver it directly back to Sinatra, no one else. Woodfield did as he was told, developing the photographs himself when he saw something that made his stomach churn, he said. According to him, on the film, it was an unconscious Marilyn Monroe positioned on all fours being raped by multiple people. According to Woodfield, it was clear that Marilyn was neither having a good time nor was she in consent of what was happening. He said that when he delivered the photos to Sinatra, Marilyn was already dead, and he told the singer to destroy the pictures. When asked what the purpose of the images was, Woodfield claimed that Sinatra, Giancana, and even the Kennedys were finished with Marilyn, and they were all tired of the risk that she was posing. The images were a means of either destroying her, if that's what needed to be done, destroying her career, or keeping her silent. A few years later, FBI agent Bill Romer would claim that in wiretaps of Sam Giancana, the mobster buddy who owned Cal Neva with Sinatra, he would claim that they captured the gangster bragging to Johnny Roselli, remember him, the CIA Mafia guy from the last episode? He would claim that he had heard on the tape these two men joking about Giancana having sex with an unconscious Marilyn Monroe the weekend before her death. And Roselli, allegedly in these tapes, laughs and says, "You really have a thing for fucking the broads of these brothers, don't you?" Ugh, Mike, like just, it's so disgusting. All of these people who we know are around her were just disgusting. Now, no one's really ever told these stories. Nothing I've seen has ever, like I said, I checked out about 7 or 8 years ago, but over the years, the dozens, if not hundreds of Marilyn Monroe books, documentaries, films that have been paraded in front of us that I've personally watched, read, ingested, not a single one has ever faced the brutality of these accusations with any kind of significant weight at all. And I don't know why. And I know some of you are probably thinking the same thing, right? You're like, EB, these are just stories. Like, we can't listen to just stories. Oh, we're not going to listen to stories about a woman being raped by a bunch of criminals that we know for a fact she was hanging out with. We're just going to like not believe that a woman could be raped by bad criminal men who do criminal things, who are convicted criminal men. Like, I just want you to just break this down to the simplest concept, that these stories from Woodfield and these later wiretaps, which confirm what Woodfield says, it breaks down to one very simple thing. Bad men did a bad thing to a woman, and like, that's it. And for some reason, I've been talking about this on TikTok, and it's getting really bad reactions from people who claim to be Marilyn Monroe fans. Why is that so unbelievable? Especially in the fact that you know how Marilyn Monroe's life ended, with an either purposeful or accidental suicide. Why then is it so hard to believe that the claim is that Marilyn Monroe was raped, right? Whatever else happened around it, photographs, whatever the reason for it was, trying to get someone to be silent, trying to do threats, blah, 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 blah. The thread is essentially the story is that Marilyn Monroe was raped, right? And like, I can't wrap my mind around why the fact that this never been presented in the age of Me Too. When you put these rumors in the context of everything else that you've ever seen or heard that you know to be factual about Marilyn's final weekend at Cal Neva, the final week of her life, doesn't it make sense? Doesn't it make sense? Every witness who described her over the weekend described her as either being emotional or off her face on pills and alcohol. Multiple people described her as weeping, depressed, too scared to leave her room. One person said she was too scared to leave her room. When she was sent home early on Frank's plane again, Peter Lawford went with her, and he claimed that she was weird on the way home. He said she was completely out of it, as though she were in a daze. And this is a man who had seen her fucked up so more times than either one of us could count, probably more times than Marilyn could be able to count, right? And he said she was weird. He said she was in a daze, she didn't have any shoes on, and she didn't say anything. She just walked off the plane, just got into a car, and was driven home. Just silent. So let's just think about that. As trauma-informed and emotionally intelligent people, if this all makes sense, does the idea that Marilyn Monroe was raped by brutal men the weekend before her death make sense? Because it does to me. It does to me. A woman 1 week out of endometriosis surgery, yeah, she'd be upset if she was like, and on painkillers, right? She like all of it just all makes sense. It all makes all these little pieces suddenly make sense. And it makes a lot more sense than Frank Sinatra, who was a notorious abuser of women, having some kind of like moral concern and trying to save her life and all this kind of stuff. Like, if Marilyn was cracked out on pills and emotional, that fits with stories of her being drugged and abused. That's ultimately what it comes down to. Does that make sense for you? Well, if it doesn't, let's add the final additional context, the very last week of her life. What happened to Marilyn Monroe after she came home from Cal Neva? Because I think you look there, it just proves these stories about Cal Neva in my mind. So Marilyn died 1 week to the day after her trip to Frank Sinatra's Cal Neva Lodge. Most people haven't looked twice in that connection. I guess they don't want to, and it helps all these men involved if we don't look at it, because woo, what a chaotic week, and wow, does it not point back to a lot of these men. Marilyn, that week after she comes home from Cal Neva, she stops sleeping, she stops eating. She was restless and emotionally volatile, and this is all according to her psychiatrist and things that she was saying and things that her housekeeper said in the years since. She was described as bursting into tears, just like bursting into tears if you said the slightest thing to her, being anxious and being paranoid to the point that she was scared to go to sleep. Wow, if you had been knocked out, if you had been drugged and then raped, wouldn't you be scared to go to sleep? She was scared to go to sleep, and she was convinced that people were breaking into her home, tapping her phones, trying to intimidate her, and stealing stuff from her home. Spoiler alert, they fucking were. They were doing these things to her. During this time, Marilyn was also claimed to have been making a lot of calls. Besides the normal calls to Peter Lawford and her other friends, they also tracked down 8 alleged calls to the Justice Department, where her good friend, Bobby Kennedy, was the head as the attorney general. Now, a lot of people have made a big deal about these phone calls. They don't want to talk about Cal Neva, but they want to talk about these alleged phone calls to the Justice Department, right? And people like to point to these as proof that Marilyn was obsessed with Bobby and she was calling him to threaten him, to tell him she was going to go public and she was going to give a press conference and yada, 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 yada. But I want you to really think about that. Bobby Kennedy was in Los Angeles at this time. He was between Los Angeles and San Francisco during this time. He was not in Washington, D.C. at the Justice Department, okay? If Marilyn Monroe, who had 100% had a romantic secret relationship with Bobby Kennedy that we now know is factually true, she did not need to call the Justice Department to talk to him, okay? She did not. Even if he changed his number, she would have had half a dozen other numbers to call him at. She would have had private numbers at his hotel that he could not change to call him at. So that's absolutely ridiculous. But wouldn't it make sense to call the Justice Department over and over again the week after you came home from a place where you were allegedly raped by criminals that they were supposed to be actively hunting for? Because Bobby Kennedy wouldn't have been the only person at the Justice Department that Marilyn Monroe knew. Marilyn Monroe had been schnoodling and canoodling with these men in power for years and years and years. She knew other people in the Justice Department. And she also knew Bobby Kennedy well enough to know that he was friends with Frank Sinatra and some of these guys that had probably raped her. So calling him, probably not going to help. But if you had connections in the Justice Department and you had just been raped by multiple mafia guys, yeah, I think you'd be calling the Justice Department to report sexual assault, wouldn't you? I know I would. I don't know. I wasn't there. I can't tell you that these things happen factually, but I just know what practically makes sense to me. And I know that Marilyn Monroe was not a moron. It makes more sense that she was reporting what happened than chasing a man who was right down the road. Friends and employees of Marilyn during this time, including her psychiatrist, described her as being scarily on the edge this whole week. This whole week after she comes back, this is when they start saying, oh, maybe we need to put her in a psychiatric facility. We might need to have her committed. And then they go, no, she's so bad. She was so bad in this week after she got home that they were scared putting her in a psychiatric facility would make her kill herself. There is a dramatic turn where she suddenly cannot be left unsupervised. Marilyn saw her psychiatrist during this time every day during this week, sometimes multiple times in a day. He would claim that he was helping her to detox off of barbiturates, which is also really, really interesting and something that I had never been told before. But she was supposedly coming down off of barbiturates at this time, and she was only been giving a small number of pills. But somehow, magically, the night that she dies, this doctor, this psychiatrist, just so happens to leave her with double the number he had been leaving her with before, which is quite interesting. Marilyn's team rallied around her during this time, not in a caring, supportive way. None of them seemed to like her. They all seemed to hate her because she was not like this go-along Republican glory hole anymore. It was very much like we've got to keep the cash cow alive. So she had someone with her 24/7. Like there was someone on her payroll was constantly around her. Her housekeeper lived in the house and would come to her room to check on her at regular intervals. Her PR manager, Pat Newcomb, was scheduled to stay the night with her that Saturday that she died. And her manager was in and out of the house as well. And this is where it's going to get even more fucking weird. Now, it has long been debated whether or not Bobby Kennedy saw Marilyn Monroe during this week. The conspiracy theories like to throw around claims that he came in with Secret Servicemen and he killed her to protect himself and his brother from this increasingly unhinged Marilyn Monroe that was threatening to go public. But I think I've now found some intriguing evidence that could very well put Bobby Kennedy close to Marilyn Monroe on the night of or the night before her death. And I'm not even, I have to like almost take a deep breath before we do this because it's weird. This is so weird and it's true. You can search this up. Now, disclaimer, I do not think that Bobby Kennedy killed Marilyn Monroe. So if that's what you're here for, just go ahead and fast forward to the end. I do not believe that, but I do think that he unwittingly had, well, maybe not even unwittingly. I do think he had a final indirect hand in her death. And here's why. The Kennedys have long claimed that Bobby Kennedy was nowhere near Marilyn Monroe before she died, but we now know that's not true. Okay. In the years since his death, Bobby Kennedy's whereabouts have been tracked down extensively. And we now know as a fucking fact that he was in California at the time of Marilyn Monroe's death. He had been there for months. That's a year maybe because he was doing all this filming stuff for a JFK property. It was a whole fucking thing. But we now know for a fact that on the day of her death, he moved between San Francisco and Los Angeles. That happened within 24 to 48 hours of her death. 100% it happened. But here's the extra layer that I think proves it. Okay, follow me. This is it. Final descent, folks. This is weird shit. Neighbors of Marilyn at the time when she died got interviewed, and like three of them said, they claimed, they swore up and down, and they kept the same story for years, swore up and down that they saw Bobby Kennedy and another young man who they did not recognize going into Marilyn's home on the Saturday afternoon before she died. Okay. And she died on late Saturday night or early on Sunday morning. I think she died Saturday night. I think that's when it happened. Now, why do I think this is important? Why do I think it's important that the neighbor saw Bobby Kennedy there? That's not proof of anything. Here's the interesting coinky dink. These neighbors have been discounted as conspiracy theorists for years, but I don't think they should be, because we now know via FBI records and firsthand claims of Secret Service members at the time that Bobby Kennedy, for at least a year since 1961, had been a frequent visitor of Marilyn's home, and that he had often called and dropped in for a drink or for dinner. These neighbors who were like, we saw Bobby Kennedy on the driveway, they knew what Bobby Kennedy on the driveway looked like. They had been watching it for a year. They knew what it looked like when he came swirling around to get his nut off, right? These neighbors knew it. They knew his swagger. They knew what he looked like up close and at a distance. And I know you're going, but EB, that doesn't mean that he was there the afternoon that she died. Maybe not, but I think Warren Beatty might have given us the final piece of circumstantial evidence that we need to just get it all out there, right? Because the other sleuths have tracked down the fact that he moved between San Francisco, Los Angeles back to San Francisco on that Saturday, okay? We know that. But a few years ago, Warren Beatty sat down and gave what I think is a really important interview. And I don't think he realizes how important it is, because he said, I think it was 3 years ago, he met Marilyn Monroe for the first time the day that she died. He says he meets her that Saturday, and that he said they have a walk on the beach. I don't know if they had a walk on the beach, but he says he meets her that Saturday and she dies on the Sunday. You can Google this. I'm not kidding. He said it. He said that he attended a dinner party on that Saturday. And he says the night before she died, but I'm pretty sure she died that night. And that he ended up meeting her there for the first time at this dinner party. And he said the two of them had a walk, and she seemed incredibly sad. More than anything else, he said she was just incredibly sad. Now, why is this important? Why do I think that this matters? It matters because this is the time in which Warren Beatty was the young actor who Bobby Kennedy had been sent to Los Angeles to court specifically. This is a real thing. You can look it up. One of the big reasons that Bobby Kennedy was in California to begin with, he was supposed to be clearing out mafia crime, which he had not been doing. His bigger thing is he was attempting to get a movie made of his brother's World War II exploits. There had been a script written about it, and Bobby had been given the script as a personal mission by JFK to go and get a movie made about JFK in Hollywood. And JFK, it turns out, was obsessed with Warren Beatty playing him. And so he told Bobby, you go get him for this movie, and you do whatever it takes to get him for this movie. This story is detailed in Peter Biskin's Easy Riders, Raging Bulls. I'm not making it up. It's in print in a book. Peter Biskin, I'll put it down in the description. I think that's a huge fucking piece. And even if it wasn't at her home, that day before she died, Marilyn was alleged to have attended a dinner party at Peter Lawford's home. And Peter Lawford is where she and Bobby hung out and relaxed and, led their affair together. So even that angle makes sense. It would make sense that Bobby brought Warren Beatty around to meet the glamorous and super famous Marilyn Monroe in his attempts to woo the young man into making the Kennedy movie. And it certainly lends itself to the idea that Marilyn could have contacted or connected with Bobby the last 24 hours before her death. And why do I think that's significant? Why do I think that has anything to do with her death if I don't think Bobby killed her? Well, for years, there's been this consistent rumor that I believe is as believable as allegations of sexual assault. And they are this. It has long been storied that the weekend before her death, Bobby Kennedy ended his relationship with Marilyn Monroe. Okay? Hardcore historians, and extreme conspiracy theorists, they all even kind of agree on that, right? Like, people think that there was some kind of an emotional break with Bobby Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe that weekend that she died. And I think it might be true. Because think about it. The Kennedys just got told by Hoover they have to cut all ties with Sinatra because of all of his ties to mafia people. Well, Marilyn had the same ties. She had the same ties to the same people. She had been photographed and documented with the same scumbag men throughout the years. So I think it's very possible that Bobby had to cut ties with Marilyn, just as JFK had to cut ties with Sinatra and his mistress, Judith Exner. And I think it's very possible that Marilyn's last weekend alive was the weekend that he did it. Now, Now, I believe that there's a little bit of concrete proof for this one. If you go and read, this is crazy, y'all. This is wild. If you go and read the declassified Marilyn Monroe FBI files, there is extensive information about Marilyn and Bobby in there, about how their relationship started, how they carried it on, the length of time. And in that story about Marilyn and Bobby that they have detailed in these declassified files, they say essentially Bobby dumped her right before her death. He was extremely cruel about it and was basically, she was discarded like trash. And in that same FBI declassified file, the FBI source claims that Joe DiMaggio is told this story by an FBI informant, and that when Joe DiMaggio hears this story about how Bobby threw her off and was very cruel about it, he says that he will kill Bobby Kennedy if he ever leaves office. I'm not kidding. DiMaggio threatens to kill Kennedy. It's really, really interesting stuff, man. And I think if you look at it with a trauma-informed eye and you're just looking for like practical, logical, human behaviors, decisions, reactions, boy, doesn't this make a lot of sense, right? Doesn't it make a lot of sense? If we believe that Marilyn Monroe was raped by known criminals the last week of her life, and we believe that she could have been calling the Justice Department to get something done, is it then impossible to believe that she was denied help by Bobby Kennedy, who was supposed to be a lover and a best friend? Like, take that further. Does her suicide that we know happens, accidental or otherwise, make sense if you think she was sexually assaulted, then discarded by someone that she thought could protect her? To me, that's what ultimately makes sense. I'm going to have a hard time being talked out of that. And it makes sense to me why so many powerful men wanted to dissociate themselves from her in the years after her death. Like, it makes sense why phone records and diaries go missing. It's not because they murdered her. It's because they don't want to be associated with her. They don't want people to find out the fact that they treat her like meat, that she was nothing to them, that they literally look at people like her as fucking useless, like toilet tissue that they can just crumple up and throw away when they're done with it. And I think it explains everything else too. I think it explains weird details in the autopsy, why certain things weren't done in autopsies, why call logs, it just, everything kind of adds up if you follow the breadcrumbs of this story. And it makes sense to me that a discarded and abused woman might have been pushed to the edge of what she believed was possible to survive. I don't know. What do you think? Ultimately, Marilyn's last weekend at the Cal Neva Lodge and the last week of her life are shrouded in mystery. We're never going to get 100% concrete answers on what did and didn't happen or who did and didn't do what. Because the entire place, all the events surrounding Marilyn are cloaked by the crooked and the silent and, of course, the long arm of time. Like, most of these people are dead. Undeniably, there are a few truths that we can glean out of all of this, I think. I think Marilyn Monroe is provably not surrounded by good people, that she was never surrounded by good men. I mean, Joe DiMaggio was the best man around her, and I'm pretty sure he beat her when they were married, so, that doesn't really work either. The powerful people Marilyn surrounded herself with saw her as a toy to be used, abused, broken. Marilyn's biggest sins, I think, were being attracted to the safety, what she thought was the safety of power, and thinking that men addicted to that power had the capability to love. She was a victim of theirs and a victim of herself in so many ways, but still, I don't ever think she's been given a fair shot as a human being. They always want to paint her. She's just this, like, an abandoned woman, passed around back and forth through years of abuse, handled with utter disregard, dismissed by those she loved most, the people that she was loyal to most. It's just a sad story. It's like, no matter what you believe about Cal Neva or the last week of Marilyn Monroe's life, it's just all sad and it's all dark. It's Marilyn's body would be discovered on the morning of August 5th, 1962, nude in bed with the phone handset beside her. Lots of conspiracy theories have surrounded her discovery, as well as her autopsy and the manner of her death itself, but the conspiracies ultimately don't matter. Marilyn was dead, and the legacy, it's just now a bunch of men on it, don't they? Joe DiMaggio took care of Marilyn Monroe's funeral, and this is what I think is so interesting. Though their marriage hadn't worked out, DiMaggio adored Marilyn to the end, and he did do what he could to protect her, which I don't think was a whole lot, but everything he could do, I think he did do. When she died, and I didn't know this, he banned every single Hollywood personality from her funeral, especially Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and all the other members of the Rat Pack circle. And I don't know what got said, but it was made very apparent. Joe DiMaggio sent some kind of message to them, I think, because they were asked about it. And Frank was very much like, oh, yeah, he didn't want us there. He definitely didn't want us there. So it wasn't like the invitation got lost in the mail. I think they got told in no uncertain terms, don't you dare show your fucking face at her funeral. DiMaggio didn't want any of the people who he blamed for Marilyn's death at her funeral, and he got his way. No celebrities attended, and as far as I know, they didn't bother to make any grand display of their sadness. For the next 20 plus years, DiMaggio would have roses delivered to Marilyn's grave every week or every other week. It was like every Tuesday or something like that. Just another act of devotion. Everyone else involved in the scandal around Marilyn's death moved on fast and moved on as though she had never existed, more or less. None of the Kennedys ever spoke a word about her, though letters from Jean Kennedy explicitly stating that Marilyn was an item with Bobby would later be found in Marilyn's personal effects, which you can go and see that letter on Patreon. I've posted it there for subscribers. In 1963, after the assassination of her brother, Pat Kennedy separated from Peter Lawford. In the years after the Kennedy deaths, Lawford would he would start to speak about his last week with Marilyn, and much of it gives shades of truth to the stories, the rumors that circle what happened to her at the Cal Neva Lodge. Though he never says outright what happened to Marilyn, he described her as emotional, out of sorts, and time again shows what I believe is a genuine level of concern for her. Peter Lawford was ultimately the one that figured out something was wrong with her, and he kept calling all of these people around her, like her doctor, her manager, her housekeeper. He kept calling all these people and saying, something's wrong. She's called me and something's wrong and you need to go over there now. And he tried to go over there and they wouldn't let him go over there because of the Kennedys. And they didn't want the Kennedys having any association with her anymore whatsoever. Just really, really, really sad. They told Peter Lawford, oh no, we've checked on her. She's fine. We saw her. And they hadn't. No one had opened the door to check on her. And so Peter Lawford stopped calling eventually, and he didn't realize that she wasn't. No one had checked. No one had checked. Pat Newcomb, who was Marilyn's quote unquote best friend and her PR agent at this time that was there with her on the night she died, never, ever, 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 ever spoke a word. Now, Pat was meant to stay the night. We don't know what happened, but she had some kind of fight with Marilyn and she left. And then Marilyn died that night. Just 24 hours after Marilyn's death, Pat Newcomb, Marilyn Monroe's PR agent, was flown directly to Hyannisport, the home of the Kennedys on the East Coast. It's the Kennedy family compound on the East Coast. Within 24 hours, she was flown there. A few days after Pat arrived at Hyannisport, she was then sent to Europe, where she spent 1 year on special assignment for the U.S. government. We do not know what she was doing. Then, after that, Pat Newcomb returned to the U.S. about a year or two after Marilyn's death and was given a job in the Justice Department just a few doors down from Bobby Kennedy. I'm not even kidding you. I don't have an explanation for that, but all of that is factual. Sinatra would lose his beloved Cal Neva Lodge the year after Marilyn's death. Good. In 1963, his extensive relationship with Sam Giancana was exposed when Giancana was brought down by the FBI and an especially angry Bobby Kennedy, who now decided he's going to go tough on organized crime. Now that everybody's dead, now that his brother was dead and Marilyn was dead, he's going to do it. He's going to go after crime now. Bobby's suddenly willingness to go after the people he used to party with makes you wonder if he had a secret desire, maybe, to avenge a fallen lover or a brother. You never know. Either way, Sinatra was exposed for the gangster thug that he was, and Sam Giancana, Johnny Roselli, and all the rest ended up getting charged and brought up in front of the Senate committees to testify about their involvement with the CIA's plot to assassinate Fidel Castro. Sam Giancana would be assassinated in the basement of his home in 1975 before he could testify before the Senate committee. He was shot in the back of the neck and several times in the mouth, a sign of his willingness to talk. Jimmy Hoffa, who had allegedly made the blackmail recordings provided by Hoover to the Kennedy brothers, was also wound up dead, but his whereabouts were never discovered. JFK's assassination in 1963 and Bobby's subsequent assassination in 1968 put a sort of end to this whole sort of chapter. Most of the men involved, with the exception of Frank Sinatra, who held the true knowledge of what happened to Monroe, were dead. Sinatra would thankfully follow suit in 1998, dying of a heart attack in Cedars-Sinai Hospital, the last hospital that Marilyn had surgery in for her endometriosis, ironically. Sinatra's last words, according to his fourth and final wife, were, "I'm losing." Again, good riddance to bad trash. And that's it. The sick, sad, twisted final weekend and the final week of Marilyn Monroe's life. What do you think? Do any of these stories make sense to you? Do they make it all add up? I got to tell you, all of this together makes more sense to me than some grand conspiracy where mafia guys break in black clothes and the CIA breaks in with them and they all give her a secret poison up the butthole. It's a tale as old as time, if you think about it. A beautiful woman used for sex, then abused for sex, and paying the price through emotional crisis. It's like not a new concept. We unfortunately just saw it happen with Hayden Panettiere. We've seen it happen with Lindsay Lohan. She hasn't died yet, but there's still time, and it's not rare. And like, what is it they always say? The easiest or the most practical answer is usually the right one, right? And to me, the idea that Marilyn Monroe was involved with shady men who used her to collect information on other men, who used her to get blackmail on other men, I think that she probably said to them, no more, I'm not doing this anymore. And she was probably quite loyal to the Kennedys that she thought were doing good for the country. And I think it's very likely she got assaulted for it and struggled to live with that assault after. And that's practical to me. So, let me know what you think. Let me know what you thought about the episode, what you think about this theory. What's your theory? What do you think happened? I'm not big on the conspiracies, I got to tell you, but who knows? Who knows? There's crazier things in the world. So let me know what you think. You can follow me on social media at The Real E.B. Johnson on all the platforms that matter. Get in the comments. Put your thoughts out there, get on this episode, or just what you think happened to Marilyn in general. I'd love to know, because some of you have some even more information than I've got. So if you want to go deeper into this, or you want to see all my resources and research, head over to patreon.com/scandalqueens. I have it all laid out there with contemporary newspapers, links, the whole shebang. You can put the pieces together for yourself and see what you come up with in this never-ending mystery around Marilyn Monroe. If you want to get out of the celebrity bubble and get a more straightforward psychological approach, head over to Substack, where I have a whole database on life, relationships, personalities, family, you name it. You can get that over at therealebjohnson.substack.com. And for the rest of you, don't forget to leave a 5-star review if you loved this episode. It helps get the show out there, and it just helps me keep doing what I'm doing, because remember, I do all of this on my own, the research, the recording, the editing, the producing, like all of this is a one-woman show over here. I do everything. So if you can help me by leaving a 5-star review, please, please, please. It really means a lot. For everyone else, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is the longest episode I think I've ever done. Thank you for listening. It's crazy. I still, I check every week, and there's thousands of you listening every week. Thousands of people. It's mad. It's mental. So yeah, it's, I'm going to be doing more on this. I'm going to go even deeper into the Cal Neva Lodge, because Marilyn Monroe is not even like the wildest, craziest, most awful thing that happened there. So make sure you're following along, or you're on Patreon, or you've got me on TikTok, because it's only going to get even more wild from here. Trust me. So I'll be back next week with another great episode. Thank you, thank you, thank you again for listening. And hopefully you'll be right back here next week. But until then, keep your secrets close and your receipts closer. Stay scandalous, queens. Bye-bye.